already have several groups that have proclaimed this last. When was the new moon? Last Saturday, Friday night, Saturday. They proclaimed Friday night, Saturday as the first day of Aviv and the first day of the new year. Saturday. So they proclaimed that not as the 13th month, but as the first month, which means that according to them, they're going to be celebrating Passover in a week or so. And again, there's a lot of confusion out there. So the first one that I want to look at is this one says determining the date for Passover. The biblical calendar begins in the spring with a celebration of Rosh Hashanah, not the rabbinic calendar. There are two calendars that are followed apart from the biblical calendar within Judaism and Christianity. Judaism follows the rabbinic calendar. Christianity follows the Advent calendar. The Advent calendar. And the Advent calendar in Christianity begins on the first Sunday of December. That's when technically their religious year begins. The Jewish calendar begins on the conjunction moon, which is a little bit more biblical. But again, it's not biblical that it's in the conjunction, but at least it starts in the first, in Aviv. Unlike our calendar, which is based on the solar year, the biblical year uses 12 lunar months of 29 to 30 days in length. By the way, the Muslim calendar, the calendar of Islam, is strictly a absolute lunar calendar of 29 or 30 days, which means that every month the month shifts the calendar, and their holy days are on a different month every year. So every Muslim holy day, it could sometimes they end up in spring, sometimes in summer, sometimes in the middle of winter. One year they could celebrate their main festivals during our Passover, and sometimes during our Sukkot or the Christian Christmas and different times. Ours is a lunar calendar, but it's also adjusted with the solar calendar, which is what has happened this year. This year is what we call a leap year. And because it's a leap year, that means that we have a 13th month. And that's what this group down south is not getting. They're not getting that there's a 13th month. And because there's a 13th month, Adar 2, Passover is going to be delayed until April. Passover is not in February. By the way, Ron, let's look at this and then I'll explain that. Genesis 1:14. Genesis 1:14. And Elohim said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide day from night. Let them be for signs and for seasons, for days and for years. So one thing that we know is that the lights, the sun and the moon, are for signs, number one, which is otot. Otot. Ot is a sign. Ot is a sign. And for seasons, moedim, for the appointed times. And of course, for days and for years. How do we determine the date of Passover? Well, first of all, because Adonai gave us uh, the sun, the moon, and the stars in the heavens, we will use the sun and the moon for the evidence of when Passover is. The number one evidence is the spring equinox. The equinoxes occur when the sun passes over the equatorial plane. The two solstices occur when the sun reaches its position farthest from the equator. Each solstice lies halfway between the two equinoxes. And so many of you studied this, and I think it's in junior high, high school, and science when all of us learned that. Remember? How many remember learning that in science? Unless you were fooling around. Anybody here was fooling around? If you don't know about the solstices and equinoxes, that means that you were fooling around during ninth grade science class, because the ninth grade science book is about the equinoxes, right, Gilbert? You would see Gilbert wasn't fooling around. He knows this stuff. Shooting. Some of you used to remember spitwads. Do they have those today? I bet you kids don't know about spitwads. Huh? Who doesn't know about spitwads? You don't, Gilbert. Okay. They don't have spitwads in Texas? Oh, wow, look at that. Michael, tell her what a spitwad is. Um, so we have here uh, equinox, and the equinoxes, the spring equinox, is what determines the first determination of Passover is the spring equinox. Now, the spring equinox occurs around March 21st, March 22nd. March 21st, March 22nd. Passover cannot occur before March 21st or 22nd. Impossible. That's why part of these people doing Passover in a week or so, it's impossible. Why? Because the equinox has not occurred. In other words, it's the equinox that brings in spring. It's the equinox that brings in spring. And Aviv means spring, by the way. And what does spring mean? Spring means that the tulips spring up, flowers spring up. Fall means that the leaves fall down, the leaves fall. Spring, they come up. Fall, they fall down. Aviv means to rise up, to come up. And so, if you want to know the true date of Passover, number one, wait until the equinox. Number two, the crescent moon. The crescent moon. And that's simple, that's easy. Uh, every new moon is a crescent moon. The new moon is not the is not the conjunction. The new moon is not the conjunction. The new moon is not the full moon. In fact, some of our people here were confused about that because we had a discussion here last week, and one person said, "I've always has been told, and I was an impression that the full moon is the new moon." So they were actually waiting for the full moon as the new moon, and every time the new moon started, they would blow the shofar. Well, I told him, no, you don't blow the shofar on the full moon or new moon. And so the crescent moon, after this first crescent moon after the spring equinox. So whenever the spring equinox occurs, the next crescent moon, the next crescent moon is going to be um, Rosh Hashanah, the new moon and the beginning of the year. Now, the third one, up until recent times, and by recent, I'm talking probably the last 10 years, before, and I believe it was Nehemiah Gordon and some other guys, before them, we did not have barley reports from Israel, from Jerusalem. There was no such thing as barley reports. It wasn't until the Temple Institute decided to start training Cohens on the barley that barley reports started coming in, and other people like Nehemiah Gordon and other people caught on to what the Temple Institute was doing, and they started doing barley reports. And so, in a sense, this third one still hasn't gotten a lot of uh, mileage to it because it's still a new idea. Now, among us, we've studied this for several years, now. So most of you guys, especially the men that have been coming, are familiar with the barley, but most messianic congregations, all they look is the equinox and the crescent moon, which means that there could be a discrepancy with the barley and with the congregations that are now doing the barley from the congregations that are not doing the barley. And most messianic congregations are not doing barley. Most messianic congregations are following the rabbinic conjunction and the rabbinic Passover schedule, which means that if you follow the conjunction and you have a Jewish calendar, Passover will be the same time every time that the calendar is made, which means that if you have a Jewish calendar, you could predict when Passover is going to be, not only this year, but next year, and the year after that, and the year after that, and the year after that, and 2,000 years from now. And you could actually figure it out in the year 2525, if man is still around, um, when the Passover is going to occur, especially for all those old people that know about the year 2525. The young kids don't know about the year 2525. Uh, do they? Um, Deuteronomy 16:1. Oh, wait. The new year begins in the month in which the barley ripens. Barley ripened first. It was used for the wave sheaf offering of the first fruits of their harvest. So the barley has to be ripe because if we look at Leviticus 23, of unleavened bread, and we are told now on the day rabbinic theology has made, to make it simple, has made the 16th the day after the Sabbath. The 15th is always a Sabbath. Always remember that. The 15th is always a Sabbath in rabbinic theology. Well, in back then too, also as a day. The 15th and the 21st are no work days. No work days. They're Sabbaths. So the 15th is a Sabbath. The 14th is preparation day every year. Passover day is preparation for the first day of unleavened bread. Passover day is preparation for the next 7 days, the next day of the feast of the Sabbath. So always remember that. The 14th, Passover day, is preparation day for the first day of unleavened bread, which is a Sabbath. Now, that's what they believe. That's not what Scripture teaches. Scripture teaches that the day after the Sabbath. Now, if the 15th is a Sabbath, then yes, it's the 16th. But if the 16th is a Sabbath, then it's the 17th. If the 17th is a Sabbath, then it's the 18th. This day of first fruits of the barley is a movable feast. That means that Shavuot is a movable feast. To rabbinic theology, first fruits is not a movable feast. First fruits is always the 16th, which is the week or the end of the week. First fruits over here could be any day of the week. Yom Rishon, what we call in. Okay. That means that any of these days could be unleavened bread. 3 days and 3 nights later was the Feast of First Fruits, which was a Sunday. That means the 17th. If the Feast of First Fruits is barley, then that means the barley has to be aviv. The barley has to be ripe. And so for you to bring the first sheaf like this is a hand's breadth. And they would bring, and the priest would offer a hand's breadth of barley with a Yeshua was rising to the Father to present himself to the Father. So, look at this. We have to have the spring equinox. We have to have a crescent moon. But we also have the barley of Aviv. If the barley is not Aviv, if it's not ready to present to Adonai, then it's a no-go. It's a no-go. And of course, we are now in just the beginnings of understanding this concept because has not been taught for 2,000 years. The spring equinox has been taught, and the conjunction has been taught, but the crescent moon, although it hasn't been taught, to come up with a crescent moon, all you have to do is look for the conjunction, and then wait till you see the crescent moon. And again, it must be emphasized again. We are going to look for the crescent moon, not here, but in Jerusalem. We believe in what's called Jerusalem primacy. It's not when you see the new moon, it's when the new moon is seen out of Jerusalem. And if we don't follow that, then you could actually have Passover in 3 different days around the globe. Since we are a globe, then a group could be following Passover in China, a group in Israel, and a group in Brazil or Argentina, whatever. Different groups could be following Passover. And in the ancient world, that wouldn't be too much of a problem because there was hardly any communication between groups. But today, it would present a major problem uh, because one group would be ahead, one group would be behind, and which means that the group in Israel would always be right. In the middle, they would always be right. But the group in China and the group in the United States could be wrong, which we've been wrong. Deuteronomy, it was used for the wave offering, chief offering of the first fruits of their harvest. Deuteronomy 16:1. We are commanded, keep the month of Aviv. The word Aviv means what? Spring. And make the Passover sacrifice to Yahweh your Elohim at night. Because in the month of Aviv, Yahweh your Elohim took you out of Egypt. Notice here that it says the Aviv. The Aviv. And so the month of the first fruits, the spring, the month of the spring, of the ripening, the coming up. And Exodus 9:31, which describes the devastation caused by the plague of hail. Watch this. And this is one of the plagues. Remember when in the plagues, and the flax and the barley were smitten because the barley was Aviv, and the flax was Givol, and the wheat and the spelt were not smitten because they were dark, Afliot. In other words, the wheat and the spelt were still dark. They were still in the kernel. They hadn't goldened up because when wheat, barley, and all those grains open up, they open up golden, the gold. Um, and they were in the cocoon still dark. So the wheat and the spelt always open up later. That's why for Shavuot is the first fruits of the wheat harvest. The Bekurim here is the first fruits of the barley harvest. Bekurim means first fruits. So you have the Bekurim of the barley and the Bekurim of the wheat. When the Passover, when the plagues were coming, right before Passover, remember the Passover was coming. Well, think of that. If the barley was Aviv, then that means Passover occurred after the spring equinox on 14 days after the crescent moon, and the barley was Aviv. So in the first Passover, all three were present. In the first Passover, all three were present. So this is how we determine Passover. Now, for the spring equinox is the same all over the world. It's usually March 21st, 22nd, by the way. March 22nd is my brother Tony's birthday. So the spring equinox usually always occurs at his birthday. Um, So we'll be able to see it here. We'll be able to see it. Um, the crescent moon, we'll be able to see it. And by the way, like I said last week, it is my hope that the night of the crescent moon, like the night of Yom Teruah, that we could come and have a New Year's celebration because that is the true biblical New Year. No funny little hats, no little whistles, no things like that. Uh, but we need to declare the new moon, the new moon of the first month. And let's go ahead and stop here for any questions that you might have on this, and then to the next. We'll turn to the next page. It's a two-sided, so yeah, mine's a next page, but yours is two-sided, so we'll turn to the back. Uh, any questions or comments? Is not confusing? Who's that handsome young man that just came in over there? Huh? No, I'm talking about the handsome young man back there, huh? No, no, it's not Gabriel. It's but Gabriel is with him though. Now Gabriel and Debbie are with him, but we're not talking about Gabriel. We're talking about someone else, right? Anybody else? Comments, comments. Yes. We don't know what type of offering that was. Because there's two types of offering that it could be. Now, if Abel offered, if it was a offering of the first lamb, then Adonai accepted Abel's because he offered the first lamb, but he did not accept Cain's because he didn't offer a lamb, he offered fruit. But there's other offerings that you could bring fruit. If you are a herdsman, which Abel was, you brought your lamb. If you were a farmer, which Cain brought, you brought your fruit. The problem we have here is that Adonai accepted one, but he rejected the other. Why? Well, pretty much either if it was this type of an offering or this type of an offering, it depended on Cain's heart. Cain had a bad heart. Sin was there. He didn't want to give Adonai the first and the best, whether it was a lamb or of the produce. So Adonai did not bless him, did not accept his offering because his heart was wrong. But we don't know if it was a Yom Kippur offering or a Passover offering. Of course, we don't have in that early day any indication. But because Adonai sacrificed the lamb, now can enable come to sacrifice a lamb and or give to Adonai a thanksgiving offering, a teruma, ola, whatever it would have been, but we don't know what it was. But, so we're all in cahoots with when Passover is going to be, right? Where we all know when Passover is. It's going to be 14 days from the new moon. Now, since we are a 13th month, definitely the barley is going to be Aviv. That If it's a 12th month, it could be a little early. And 1 year, it was early, and we had to wait. But this year, because if you have a 13th month, it's automatic that the barley is probably going to be in Aviv. Um, so from the next new moon, from the next new moon, we count 14 days, and it'll be Passover. We'll we'll do Passover here that night. Now, um, if you've never been to a Passover, is there anybody here who has never been to a Passover? Everybody's been to a Passover. Um, Next week, we are going to talk about the protocols for Passover. Make sure you're here next week because the protocols for Passover are important because most, even Messianic Jews and Messianic Gentile churches, do not follow the protocols of Passover. They do not follow the protocols of Passover. Um, and so I want to make sure that you guys follow the protocols of Passover. Okay, well, let's go to the next page in the back. Turn to the back. And this paper is an examination of the progression of Passover. Like everything in Scripture, it's progression. There's a progression. Adonai teaches us something, and he builds on that, and he builds on that, and he builds on that. Always look at what Adonai does as a building in progress. A building in progress. In fact, we are still in the middle of the building. Adonai hasn't finished the building yet. The building will be finished in eternity. The building will be finished in eternity. Right now, while we are in the last days, we're in the last days of the sixth millennium. There is still a whole 1,000 years from any point in time that the resurrection takes place. There is still another 1,000 years of human history with unwritten stories, with another covenant, the covenant of peace, a brit shalom, Adonai tells Jeremiah. So there's still a lot way to go. The end days is the end days of our time before the millennium. And yes, we are in the end days, but not in the last day of human history. We're in the last 2 days from Yeshua's time to right now, we're in the last 2 days of human history. And pretty soon, the seventh day of human history is going to begin. So it's a progression. If you understand that, I had a person say, well, what's interesting is that we believe that the Old Testament was given to the Jews and they messed up. So now Adonai is using the Gentiles. Of course, we don't explain it that way, but we believe that what they call the Old Testament, beginning with Torah, they're all foundations, and Adonai builds on the foundations, and make things better and better. We are a work in progress. How many of you are personally a work in progress? Don't raise your hands because you don't want to say, oh, they're, protect the guilty, constantly having to protect the guilty. But every one of us should see ourselves as a work in progress. Well, every congregation is a work in progress. Every and the whole body of Messiah is a work in progress because things aren't going to happen until we reach eternity. You have a question? You were just waving. You mean the temple? Right now, several groups are attempting to build a temple, and which will be the third temple. And whether Yeshua comes back or not has no significance with the temple. We know that when Yeshua comes, there will be a temple. But remember, the third temple could be built and the Muslims could destroy it. A fourth temple could be built, the Muslims could destroy that, or some other. History could go on for another 1,000 years. But when Yeshua comes back, there will be a temple. Now, I'm of the persuasion that this fourth temple is going to be the one that the anti Messiah inhabits. But again, we have to make sure that we understand that every generation since Yeshua's first coming has thought of itself as the last generation. And we should think of ourselves because we should always be ready for him to come back for us. We should not fall asleep, like he said. But at the same time, we need to understand that every generation has come and gone, and he still hasn't come, and it's been 2,000 years. In the year 2033, it will be 2,000 years since he left. The 2,000 years was not in the year 2000 Y2K. The 2,000 years is 2030 from his death and resurrection, correct? Yes, correct. No, they cannot be side by side because the temple of Adonai is holy and the dome of the rock is not holy. Um, and the dome of the rock is where the temple was. So true biblical faith would not allow a holy priesthood to build it aside and give prominence to Islam. Impossible. Do not clash. I mean, do not meet. Have nothing in common. Yeah. Where the Dome of the Rock is, that's where the Holy of Holies was. And that needs to be destroyed before the third temple could be built. It could be an earthquake. That mount is earthquake prone. It could be, I've always prayed, thank you, Father, for the dome over Jerusalem, but every, can you just open up that dome and let it hit? Yeah, on the Dome of the Rock. And so they destroyed themselves. Um, Endor, um, another army, because remember, history teaches us that our personal history, our personal life here is not everything. And history teaches us that armies come and go. There'll be wars and rumors of wars. There'll be nations against nations. And so the Muslims in one day could fall, and another army, the Buddhists, the Hindus, another army could be raised up, another religion, because they're all enemies of Adonai. They're all enemies of Adonai. Um, well, let's look at this examination. And the top row across, the first Passover was in a house in Goshen. Then we have the Exodus. The second Passover was in a tabernacle in the wilderness in Shiloh and in Jerusalem. The first temple Passovers, Solomon builds the temple. Solomon's temple is destroyed, and for 70 years there was no Passover. And then Zerubbabel, he builds a new temple called the Second Temple, and this is the one that Antiochus uh, comes into. Herod rebuilds the temple. Zerubbabel's temple is rebuilt by Herod, and then Herod's temple is destroyed in the year 70 AD. And so the first Passover is in Exodus 12, 1 through 14. Now, we're going to go over these very slightly, and next week in the protocols, we'll go more. But in the first Passover, after the first day of the first month, on the 10th day of the month of Aviv, is when the lamb was selected. A lamb was selected. On the 14th of Aviv, at twilight, and twilight begins the day. Twilight does not end the day, twilight begins the day. Because twilight is when you see the three lights. So when you see three lights, when you see two lights, and in the mouth of two or three witnesses, the third one confirms it, and the new day begins. You take a lamb 1 year old, you put blood on the doorpost, you roast the lamb, no bones are broken, and there are no leftovers. So on the 14th at twilight, at the beginning of the day, this is what you do. And you eat it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. You eat it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. Now, there are the whole stack of verses down there that I want you to use as homework. And by next week, everyone's Bible should have all these verses underlined or in yellow or, marked up so that you know everything there is to know about the first Passover. Now, the second Passover occurred 1 year later, on the second year of them being in the wilderness. And again, it started off at the wilderness, and from the wilderness through all their journeys into Jerusalem in the tabernacle, and they, again, after the spring equinox and the new moon, on the 10th day of the month of Eve, at twilight, they took a lamb 1 year old, blood on the altar, roasted, no bones broken, no leftovers. Now look at that. In this case, it's blood on the altar. In the first one, blood on the doorpost. Only on the first Passover that they put blood on the doorpost. On the next ones, it was in the altar in the tabernacle, which means please do not sacrifice a lamb for Passover today. Do not sacrifice. And if you do kill a lamb to eat, you do not sacrifice it. To sacrifice a lamb means that you get the blood. You kill the lamb and you get the blood, and that blood would be put in the first Passover on the lintels and the door, and the second and subsequent Passovers on the altar. We don't do that today. Why? Because you can only sacrifice a lamb in Jerusalem and on the temple, and a priest has to catch the blood. You cannot, you have no authority. In fact, to me, it's blasphemy. It's a blasphemy for someone to take blood today and sacrifice a lamb and put it on the doorpost of the house. It is that serious. Yes, sir. Is it considered what? Oh, it definitely they would be cults. Yeah, yeah, because that is a cultic activity. It's a now the temple was a cult, not in the bad sense, but a cult is a group that does things differently. And definitely today there's people doing things differently, and and the term is a heretical cult. Heretical cult. So a heretical cult, among them are Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, and a lot of these heretical cults that are sacrificing. And the lunar Sabbath people are a cult that are sacrificing. In Phoenix, 2 years ago, they sacrificed the lamb in Phoenix, and a pastor that was over there, uh, what do you call it when they put it on the telephone? A message on the telephone, text, text, texting, texted, texted me. What are they to do? Because this guy is advertising that they're going to sacrifice a lamb. So I said, keep away from him first of all, and let your people know not to go to their service, and let your people know that they cannot partake of that lamb. They cannot partake of. Better not. Do not. It's one of those things that fire from heaven could literally fall on those groups. So they are heretical cults. Okay. Again, no leftovers, unleavened bread with bitter herbs, and then from this time on, a celebratory supper was initiated. In the first Passover, there was no celebratory supper because the first Passover was the celebration. But from the second Passover on, it becomes a memorial. In fact, in the first Passover, there in Exodus 12, Adonai says, "You shall use this as a memorial. Every time you do this, it will be a memorial." And a memorial is a time that you get together and eat and remember something, like an anniversary. In your anniversary, you go out to eat a real nice meal. Um, and so it's a celebratory time, a memorial, an anniversary. And on the second Passover, Numbers 9 was the first year anniversary. And they had a first year anniversary meal and what we would call a candlelight barbecue dinner. Candlelight barbecue dinner. Now, if you're not able to celebrate on the 14th of Aviv because of uncleanness or travel, you may celebrate it on the 14th of the second month. But I want you guys to start putting this in your mind right now. When Passover comes, that night of Passover, whatever you're doing right now, start learning to cancel. This is not the time that you make plans to be in Las Vegas or in, you know, Chicago. This is not the time that if something happens, most of the time, nothing will happen. A lot of people, how many of you read that book in, I don't know if it was the 60s or 50s, probably the 70s, called Tyranny of the Urgent? Anybody read the book Tyranny of the Urgent? Tyranny of the Urgent is a book of, and it's written for a Christian audience. And we had to read that. It was one of the books in our counseling course. And Tyranny of the Urgent um, is about situations that some people consider urgent, where other people don't consider urgent. And there's a lot of people that get stuck in this tyranny, this rat race of the urgent that all. Have you ever known people that something's always happening? It's like they can't do any because it's always something going here, going over there, doing this. It's like it's a rat race. And the tyranny of the urgence is a book about the rat race that sometimes even we as Christians uh, get into. Oh, wait a second. There are some days that Adonai says, I come first. I come first. Sabbath is the first and major day where Adonai says, I come first. Not your family, not these things. Oh, well, I had an emergency. Well, was it a real emergency? Was it a real emergency? Or was it just something urgent? Urgent does not mean emergent. In fact, today we have urgent care centers, right? You go to an urgent care center when it's not an emergency. If it's an emergency, don't go to an urgent care center, right? Go to the ER. The same thing with the police. Police have 911. 911 if it's an emergency, but if it's not an emergency, they have 242 cops or 311 takes you to the city. And they'll answer your questions and they'll get, if need be, for non-emergency calls. Today I had to make a non-emergency call for two cops for the gentleman that's been here for 2 weeks now. Um, and he's had, he sits in his car with his door open, and people coming out of Walgreens just come there and they have to make a sharp turn. And if a car's coming, because he just leaves his door open and he sits in his car with the lights on, the heater on, the car turned off, and then he's constantly asking for for a jump and constantly asking for cigarette money, constantly asking for this and that. And I've had to call the police on him because he's keeps staying here. And today I got so mad at in fact, the lady at the 242 cop said, slow down, slow down. So I told her, first of all, he's driving on a suspended license. How come you guys don't catch him for that? Number two, he doesn't have registration. Number three, his plates are actually expired. That's why he doesn't have the registration. And then what are some of the other things, Tom? He doesn't have a VIN number on his car and doesn't have insurance. Any one of you that would be caught with any of this, you'd be given tickets, you'd be taken to jail, that they would impound the car and all that. And again, doesn't have plates because the cops took him. Now, the cops didn't take the car, they took his plates. And the cops told him, well, go to the vacant lot across. Don't park in public. Go to vacant lot. Well, that's not a vacant lot. That's our property. He asked Mr. T for money. I need money. And he was so bold to say, oh, I need it for what? For cigarettes. We've, the cops have been there so many times. In 2 weeks, we don't know how to get rid of the guy. And it's interesting because we've tried witnessing to him and he doesn't want to listen. It's interesting that there are people that and the police told him, since you're a nice guy, since you are not a danger to society and you're allowed to stay there. So the cops told him he could stay there. They gave him permission to stay there. Um, yeah, he gets aggressive. Uh, yeah, yeah. And he comes back here. The other day he was behind the trash bin. I don't know doing what, but well, let's go on before I get carried away here. Now, after Solomon built the temple, um, oh, we're talking about tyranny of the urgent. Um, you have 911, you have 242 cops, you have ER, you have urgent care. And one of the things that we need to understand is that Passover, we already know, every one of us knows, right? It's on the 14th of the first month, 14 days after we see the new moon. So we will be able to, once we see the new moon, say, we pretty much have it locked in now. So don't make no plans. No plans. You're going to be at your house celebrating Passover. That's what every one of you is going to do that. And again, next week when we talk about the protocols, I'll bring out the do's and don'ts that most people that do Passovers don't even have the foggiest thing that they're doing things wrong. And all kinds of people do the Passover totally wrong and against Torah and Yeshua and Paul, that we really need to have it done right. When Solomon builds the first temple, again in Jerusalem, same thing. 10th day of the first month, 14th at twilight, and the lamb's 1 year old, blood on the altar, roasted, no bones broken, no leftovers. Unleavened bread with bitter herbs and with a celebratory meal. In 2 Kings 23:2, it says, no Passover like this had ever been celebrated. What? Celebrated? Since the days when the judges ruled Israel, nor throughout the entire period of the kings of Israel and the kings of Judah. Not that no Passover had been celebrated, no Passover like this. So it was such a celebration that it was the highest celebration time here in Second Kings, um, which means that David never celebrated the Passover to this extent. And of course, two more other scriptures for you guys to look at. After the destruction of the first temple, and Zerubbabel building the next one, in what we call the second temple, again, the 10th day of the first month of Eve, 14th between the two evenings, lamb or twilight, 1 year old, blood on the altar, roasted, no bones broken, no leftovers, eaten with unleavened bread, bitter herbs, and a celebratory meal. Same thing. Same thing. Now, Matthew and Luke present to us Yeshua's Passover. Yeshua's Passover around 30 AD, 33 AD, someplace around there. We still do not know the year that Yeshua was born and the year he died. Of all the main characters in history, we know so much of many people, but of Yeshua, we don't know the year he was born. We don't know the year he died. We think it was around 30 AD. It might have been 30, as far as 33 AD. When Yeshua did the Passover, he did all the above. He did all the above. Yeshua did Passover exactly as he had been done. But then after supper, now listen to this closely. After supper, after the celebratory meal, Yeshua takes a third cup and some bread, and the third cup represents his blood, and the bread represents his body, the afikomen, and he adds another part to Passover. He adds to Passover a third part. Apart from what Moses said, the celebratory meal that was added at the second Passover, Yeshua adds a third part to Passover. Now at this time, the Pharisees and the Sadducees were only doing the top part, the first two parts. The 10th, 14th, 1 year roasted bread, blood on the altar, no leftovers, unleavened bread, bitter herbs, celebrate. That's what they were doing. But Yeshua adds a third part. Outside of Jerusalem, by the way, if Jews lived outside of Jerusalem, and they just had a celebratory meal. If the Jews of Rome, all they had was a celebratory meal to remember. They read from Exodus, they read from other things, and they remembered the Passover, but they did not kill a Passover lamb. Because even if you were a priest and you, as a Cohen, a descendant of Aaron, lived in Rome or lived in Syria or lived in Africa, you could not do Passover. All you could do was have a celebratory meal and remember the Passover. Yeshua's disciples did the same thing outside of Jerusalem. Inside of Jerusalem, they did a Passover. Outside of Jerusalem, they did not do a Passover. But outside of Jerusalem, not only did they do what the Jews outside of Jerusalem did, but they celebrated the third part, which was the cup and the bread. Now, at 70 AD, the temple was destroyed. On the last column, the temple was destroyed. That was the last Passover. The Passover of 70 AD was the last Passover. There was no more Passovers. There hasn't been no more Passovers. There will not be no more Passovers until the third temple is built. Messiah's believer did all the above with supper, food, and wine, and after supper, the Messianic believers took the cup, took the bread, the afikomen, and did it. Now, after the destruction of the temple, the Pharisees have no temple, they don't have no blood. They switched it from the 14th to the 15th. They had no lamb. They had unleavened bread, they had bitter herbs, and they had the celebratory meal. But watch what the Pharisees add. The Pharisees add Yeshua's after supper part. The Pharisees add Yeshua's part. The Pharisees add Yeshua's part. In the Mishnah and the Talmud, all the above, after supper, same thing, cup, bread, and the Seder, the Haggadah, the traditions that have become laws of egg, parsley, 4 cups, prayers. But watch this. Now, the Jews are doing, apart from the story that would occur outside of Jerusalem or inside Jerusalem with no temple, they do Yeshua. Now, the Catholic and the Protestant system switched to Sunday, no supper. They have a cup. In Catholic, Protestants only get a little piece of a little cup of juice and a little square piece of bread, and then Catholics call it the Mass. And even though Protestants don't follow the Mass, every time they do Holy Communion, it's a Mass time. Now let's go ahead and stop here for any questions. Any questions? Well, if until the kingdom, correct? Which means that it's still a work in progress. It's still a work in progress. Yeshua says, I will not drink of the cup again until I drink it, until it's fulfilled in the kingdom of heaven. That means it's fulfilled, but not completely fulfilled. It's not over. By the way, this is what helps us to understand the book of Hebrews, because the book of Hebrews uses the word better several times. We have a better covenant than the first covenant. Well, it is better. Well, they say, well, it hasn't been replaced. No, it's a work in progress. That was for that time, and Adonai adds this. Then Adonai adds this. But as Adonai adds, he doesn't take away, he just remodels. It's a Brit Chadashah, a renewed covenant. He just renews it. Anything else? Okay. Well, I had a hard day today. In fact, uh, I loaded and unloaded and loaded and unloaded bricks twice. And so we were really, we did, you all saw the wall, uh, and then there is the gate area that's going to be left open. Then we put two pilasters yesterday and today. Actually, on Sunday we did one, the base of one, and yesterday we built it up and then built the base of the second one. And today we went to go get more. I went to go get more blocks for the next one. And so that is going to be a walking gate. Now, we were only going to have the two big gates. But then I said, well, wait a second. If we have two big gates and they're always going to be locked, then James and One Eye Jack are going to be mad at me because they won't have a way to go to Walgreens. So I capitulated. I compromised. And James, we're going to have a walk in gate, 48 inches, and we're going to have a deadbolt two ways. You will get the first key. Like that, anytime you want to go between here and Walgreens, or anybody that wants to go between here and Walgreens, we have a walk-in gate. So now, none of you guys came in through here tonight, right? No, nobody went through the barrier, right? You better not, because I put nails there. No, there's no nails. I wouldn't be that mean. I know I'm mean, but not that mean. But I did get some tape and put across, which the sun had, the wind has made um, shambles. We've had to put it twice already because of the wind, not people passing through. But these gates here are already done. And so whenever we get a chance, we'll come and set them up. Um, but the two gates here are already done, and they look really nice. I think they're going to put a picture of them probably on Sabbath. On Sabbath, they'll put a picture of them, and hopefully we could put them up maybe on, even on Sunday. Um, we had, in fact, there's got pictures of Ariel and Joe and Tom welding away, cutting away, and welding. And and then we'll make this one and then this one last. Uh, Tomorrow, anybody here have really a good shovel foot? Anybody have any shovel feet? Um, well, I guess you guys are gonna have to make Mr. T do it again. Shovel feet, a foot that pushes on the shovel and makes a trench. We're gonna make a trench. So either we get a lot of people to come and help us, or Mr. T's gonna have to do it. Oh yeah, those are the gates. If anybody wants to see the gates, and Zach and them, or Ariel, I don't know who posted them, but they were posted. And so if you have the posting, you can get them from Ariel. But tomorrow we're going to come and we're going to start doing the trench by hand because we need to rent a trencher. But what we need to do first, we'll rent the trencher when we break the cement because when we rent the trencher, it's going to have to be an all day project. So I'm sure Rose would not want Mr. T to be digging a trench all day long, um, all by himself. She would not like that, right? You would not like that. And like that, she doesn't want him to come home tired and grumpy and all that because he's having to dig a trench all by himself. So, no. Um, so if anybody wants to help, we're going to be here tomorrow, and I got my clothes ready for digging a trench. Yes, sir. Oneg on Friday, correct. Yeah, Oneg for the first, first moon of the 13th month on Friday at 6 o'clock. And probably start eating by 6:30. Yes, sir. You're what? Oh, is that right? Your brother Joey. Oh, okay. Very good. We will keep you in prayer. How old was he? 68. Look at that. Okay, we'll definitely be praying. What's that? Daniel and Henrietta? Oh, Daniel passed away? Oh, I wasn't aware of that. When did he pass away? Oh, oh, is that right? Oh, Daniel and Henrietta. And and Daniel was playing with us. Uh, Martinez, um, playing guitar. He's your cousin? Oh, she is. Oh, I didn't know that. And in fact, we had one of the um, brothers from the barrio that I grew up on, um, in the same road, same. Um, there used to be a gang in our neighborhood, and I don't know if any of you remember the River Rats. The River Rats. You remember the River Rats? Is that right? Yeah. Well, one of them passed away. He's 73, I think he was. And Joe, was it Joe Torres or I think I think it was Joe. I think it's the Torres family, but I don't know if because Eugene Torres, Eddie Torres, and Joe Torres. And Eddie Torres passed away a couple of years ago, and these were, you know, Juan Urioste and all these guys. I'm pretty sure they know him, but um, and I don't know why, but the family said, "Why don't you ask, you know, Pastor Dennis to do the service?" They go to Heaven Bound, and but they're going to do it over there, but they wanted me to because he was from our barrio. But anyways, they said that what's interesting, they were telling me that all growing up, all these people from my barrio, from our street, and all these guys, they could not figure out me and Tony. And the guy told me what they were telling me. This was years ago. That I guess they were telling me. It's like the Oteros have a dome around them, and me and Tony. Think of this: me and Tony are the only guys from our barrio that did not get with the river rats. Well, we're kind of still, a little, but this guy that was telling me this is 4 years younger than me, um, and he was running around with all of them, even when they were even smaller, smaller than us. So, um, and all the people there in our road, they were all like a family, and there was 2 3 families, and so they asked me to do the service, and probably going to be on Sunday, but they were really, these people were really, really bad people at that time, you know. But I had already crossed over, and plus, big gang guys,